12:30, so we will go ahead and get started with today's Missouri DDD and U. I am Heike Johns, Director of Organizational Learning and Communication, and it has been a while since I've had the opportunity to host a webinar, so I'm excited to be here. A couple housekeeping items that I want to make sure everyone is aware of. If you have questions or comments throughout today's webinar, please make sure you put those in the chat box. And at a minimum, if you'll send those to all panelists, that will be fantastic, so that regardless of who's presenting, they will see the questions that you have come in. Everyone is muted upon entry, so you don't have that flexibility in terms of muting and unmuting, so be sure to use that chat box for those questions. And with that, folks will be answering questions in real time if there is time. There's a lot of material to cover today, so I'm not sure that that'll be a viable option, but we will make sure that we circle back around to those questions with a follow-up document. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Lisa Nothouse.
All right, Heike, thank you very much. And welcome everyone to the webinar. Today's topic is the integrated support star that is part of the Charting the Life course framework and the planning tools that they have. Some of you might recall that last month we talked about the trajectory tool, which is another great planning tool that's very beneficial in helping people identify what they do and do not want happening in their lives. A quick note, if you've missed that webinar, you can go to the division's webpage and check out that recording, and I'll drop the link to that in the chat here for you in just a little bit. We're going to get started because, as Heike said, we've got a lot of material to cover today in a short amount of time, but I'm going to let Jane introduce herself here in a few minutes, but I'll just briefly tell you who I am. I am Lisa Nothouse, and around my house, I'm also known as Mom or Nana. My husband and I have 2 adult daughters and 3 grandchildren. Our youngest daughter has a developmental disability and receives services through the division, and I currently work at the Division of DD as the Supporting Families Lead. And today on this webinar, we are going to talk about the Charting the Life course, give you a brief overview. We're going to talk about the Integrated Supports Star planning tool, and we're going to take a look at the Support Star in action. And we'll take a look at some additional resources that are also available to help with additional planning. So Jane, if you're ready, I'll let you introduce yourself, talk about the Charting Life course and the Support Star, and I'm going to pass the controls to you so that you can drive your slides.
Sounds good. Thanks, Lisa. So I'm Jane St. John. If you were here with me last time, you saw the same pictures, but I have 3 boys. They're not boys anymore, they're men in their 30s. So my youngest are twins, actually, Ben and Matt, and Ben has a developmental disability. So that's where a lot of my experience and where my part of Charting the Life course really comes from, and the examples that you'll see today as well. So Lisa already told you what our outcomes for today are, so I'm going to skip that. So let's dig right into what the Charting the Life course is all about. So it all comes down to our core belief. This is our why. This is what we always come back to, is that all people and their families have the right to live, love, work, play, learn, and pursue their life aspirations in their community. It doesn't say all people with disabilities, because people with disabilities are part of the all. So it's all people, regardless of age, ability, or anything else. And I will warn you, I'm going to move through a lot of this stuff pretty quickly because I want to get to the Support Star and really dig into that with you. So we're going to go through this first part really quickly. So all of these symbols that you see here on this slide really represent things about the Charting the Life course. The triangle that you see up here at the top really represents that only about 25% of people with developmental disabilities receive formal developmental disability services. And even the ones who do, some of that is even just targeted case management. So even within that 25%, they may not receive actual services beyond that that case management, which is very valuable. But you know, when people need therapies and personal assistance and that kind of thing too, that's not always in part of that 25%. The other part, the 75%, is what we really always want to think about when we're planning or thinking about policies, thinking about our practices, our systems, should always all the people should always be considered, because even though we only serve that 25% that's shown up there, are really 1 in 4 people, the other people out there need supports as well. And some of them might eventually come to the door of the division as well. So we need to be aware of them. The purple circle that you see here represents the person in the context of their family and their community. We know that all people exist within the context of some kind of family, whether they still live with them or whether they're out on their own. But we know that, families still provide a lot of support. So we always consider the context of the family and think about what supports the family needs as well as the person. Those symbols that you see just under the purple circle, that looks like a sun, a house, and a watch. Those are our life domains, from everything from daily life and employment to community living to healthy living, staying safe and secure. Our social and spirituality and advocacy and engagement are what we call our life domains. And those are all interconnected and help us together to make up a full life. Underneath that, you see the symbols for all of the different ages and stages of life. And we know that at each of those different ages, the things that we do and the things that we learn and how we experience life helps prepare us for those next stages of life that we come to. Just above that, you see the trajectory. We talked about the trajectory last time and how we want to have a vision for a good life. We also want to envision what we don't want so that we make sure we're not heading that direction. And that arrow represents what we call the trajectory, which is really just our path or our journey to working towards a good life. Just above that in the green, you see that kind of symbol that looks like an official building. That's really to remind us that people with disabilities and their families are really the ones that have to drive the change and lead that charge. And if you think about like the legislature, the division goes in front of the legislature every year and asks for more money. But the legislature really wants to hear the stories of the families and the individuals who use the services and how it's going to benefit them. So we have to stay on top of that. Just above that, at the very top on the right, is what we call the 3 buckets. The 3 buckets are what we all need at some time in our life. We need information. We need to know how to navigate what's out there. We need to connect with other people who have been there and done that and who understand what we're going through. And sometimes we need goods and services as well. So in the middle of all that is the star, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So the integrated support star is really how we fill those 3 buckets and how we make sure that we have the supports that we need on that journey to our good life. So looking at these 3 circles in front of you, the circle on the far left, excuse me, really represents all of us. We all exist within the context of our family and community. And this also represents that 75% of people that don't get paid supports through the division. So they're out there and they're doing whatever they can do to have a good life without paid services. In the middle circles, you see that green part of the circle has come out, and that really represents our traditional way of providing supports to people through our formal systems of support. And what that represents is that with the best of intentions, that providing services sometimes cuts people off from their family, from their community, from the things that are important to them. An example would be, think about the schools. Up until the 1970s, people with disabilities didn't even have a right to education. But then all of a sudden the schools were told, hey, you have to include people with disabilities and you have to provide supports and services and education to them. And so, not knowing what else to do really at that time, they created kind of a separate system of special education. And often, those kids were educated, in that trailer behind the school. Sometimes they still are, right? Or in a separate classroom away from their peers. They weren't educated with kids that they were growing up with and that were in their neighborhoods or even in their family. And so, again, that was done with the best of intentions, but it's not the most inclusive way to get it done. And so we move to that big circle on the right, where we see, again, the person, the family, and the community. That green part is gone, but it's replaced by all these stars. And the stars really represent all different kinds of supports where and when we need them. So a person may not need the supports wrapped around them all the time, but whether they're at home, whether they're with their family, whether they're out and about in the community, working, doing things that they like to do, what kind of supports do they need? And all those different colors represent a different kind of support that we're going to talk about. And I'm going to bring up my clock here so I can make sure I don't go too far over on time here. All right, so again, we're reminded there on the left-hand side of why we're talking about this, that we want to make sure that we're representing all people. And we want to represent that 100% of people, whether they receive services or not. And so this is what we call our integrated support star. And, you know, traditionally, when someone would ask for support in our systems, the thing they go straight for is, well, are you eligible for our supports or not? And hopefully, you know, if people were, they got services, but, you know, beyond that, we would just say, well, use your natural supports. But nobody ever really defined what that meant or helped people figure out what those natural supports were. And so our integrated support star is really an effort to kind of help define what other kind of supports there are and how we can help people to best get those supports and use those supports in their lives, whether they get paid services or not. So we're going to look at each of these individually. The first one I like to talk about is what we call relationship supports. And of course, obviously, we think about family, right? Whether you live with your family or not, you know, your family loves and cares about you, and families are committed to each other. So that's important. We also think about our friends, people that we like spending time with. We have things in common with them. And generally, as friends, we care about each other. But one of the ones we don't often think about and that I really like to highlight is the acquaintances. And these are people that we see when we're out and about. Maybe we see them often, but we don't really know them very well. And I'm going to give you a quick example. So my son, Ben, he receives paid supports to go out in the community. And, you know, we self-direct. So sometimes we're without staff, you know, people don't always give us much notice and we haven't hired a new staff yet. So there was an opportunity where he didn't have staff for a couple of weeks. And so he wasn't able to go some of the places he likes to go. And one of those places is our local community center. And at our community center, Ben likes to work out and he likes to shoot baskets. They have a nice gym there that he likes to go to and play basketball. And he wasn't able to go for a couple of weeks. So I was home from work one day and I decided to take him up there. And the minute we walked in the door, there were probably half a dozen people within a minute that came up and said, Ben, where have you been? We've missed you. We haven't seen you for a couple of weeks. We thought maybe you were sick. We didn't know what happened. I mean, all these different things that just came flowing out of these people. And I'm like, I don't even know who these people are. And Ben's not good about remembering names and stuff, but he knows he sees people in there. But the point was that these people were not close friends. They weren't family. They were people that saw him when he went up there to play basketball or use the workout equipment. But they were used to seeing him. They were familiar with him and they worried about him when he wasn't there. And I'm like, my gosh, this is wonderful that he has these people that care about him and that would look out for him if something happened. If they saw him out and about and he was struggling with something, I think they would help him out, or they would say, Ben, can we call somebody? Can we call your mom? Whatever. So those acquaintances can be a very important part of our safety and community and our connection, our safety and security and our connection to community. The next part of the star I want to talk about is the personal assets and strengths. This is really sometimes where we should start, right? So what are the things that the person is good at? What do they like to do that they're good at and that other people look at and say, hey, this is something I really like and admire about this person? What are resources or assets that are either owned by the person or the family, things that they could use? Or what are the skills and abilities that they have or the knowledge and experience that they can build? I think when you're looking at the star and you look at this section, you know, you can look at not only what the person already has or knows how to do, but what kind of resources and what kind of strengths can we help them build? So I'll give you an example. You know, Ben has cerebral palsy, and one of the things that is part of his cerebral palsy is like an involuntary movement of his head. And so The other thing about him is that he doesn't read and write very well. So he's probably not ever going to be able to pass a driver's test or be able to drive a car. I never say never, but probably not going to happen. But I like to say that, one of these days I'm going to make sure that Ben has a car in his name, that if he needs somebody to drive him around, they can use that car. Even though he can't drive it, his friends, his staff, people that know him could take him places using that car. So if we had, for instance, a staff that we hired that didn't have reliable transportation, as long as they could get to our house, they could then use that car to take Ben out and about in the community. So that would be an asset that he would have as part of his personal strengths and assets. Another thing that we think about is technology. And I think especially with the pandemic, if it's taught us nothing else, it's that we need and we can use technology in so many different ways. And so how can we use technology to help support a person? And I think about Ben, and he's probably never going to get enough funding to have 24-hour around-the-clock care. But he needs support of some kind pretty much around the clock. So even while he's still living at home, we can put things in place that will help him to someday be supported in 24-hour care, but without having a paid person always there. So for instance, we bought a Ring camera for our front door. We're getting ready to add another one to our back door with a spotlight that, if somebody comes in the backyard and might be an intruder or whatever, will light up and scare them off. But on the front door, it really helps, like when Ben stays home for short periods of time by himself. If somebody comes to the door, we can respond to that before he goes to open the door, because, even though we've told him not to open the door unless he knows who's there, if it's not to open it if it's a stranger, you never know what he's going to do. And so that technology can help support him to be home alone for short periods of time and us feel safe about it. And there's so many other ways we can use that kind of technology that we're just now getting into. Other things, like giving him his medication. We're looking at getting some sort of technology that will distribute his medication so that he can be more independent in that without having us have to get it out for him all the time. So technology is going to be part of our life one way or the other. And then community resources, the places we go in the communities, the groups we might belong to, the things out there in the community that anybody can use just because they're part of that community. So an example with Ben would be when he was in high school, as part of his transition program, he learned to ride our local bus. It's called the Omnibus. It's kind of like an Oats bus, but it's not exclusively for older people. So if you get a punch card, you can, and hopefully now they've got it more, with some kind of technology or whatever. But at the time it was a punch card, and he learned to ride this local bus that can take him all kinds of places around our local community. That's something that anybody in the community can use just because they're a member of that community. So that's something that can definitely be a support for him. And then finally, looking at eligibility supports. But, as important as DD supports are through the division, we also should look at lots of other kinds of supports, things maybe that are based on diagnosis. Maybe it's based on things like age or gender or geography, where you live, your income level, your employment status, things like Section 8 housing. Special education is an eligibility support. Food stamps, so many different things that people might be eligible for that we just don't always think about. And so what we want to do is have all of these things work together, so that people can have the supports that they need without relying just on eligibility-based supports. I'm going to just walk you through a couple of quick examples. But the thing to remember too about the STAR that I want to make sure I say is that it doesn't matter where you put things. It doesn't matter if you ever fill it out. It's the thinking. And the more you use this thinking, the more it'll just become automatic. If you're problem solving or trying to think about supports for somebody, you'll just automatically flip through all these different kinds of supports and say, are we at least seeing if they have supports in those areas, or how we can help them build things? And it doesn't matter where you put things or where your brain even puts things if you're not filling it out. So, if I'm talking about a relationship support, that might also be something that's in the community. So for instance, those acquaintances that Ben sees at the community center are relationship supports, yes, but they're also based in the community because that's where the community center is, right? So technology may be that, gosh, I have a smartphone. That's technology and I know how to use it, but it's also a personal asset and strength that I have a cell phone, right? So things can go in different places. It's really just about getting you to think through this and not necessarily where you put things. So I'm going to show you, well, I'll show you examples in a minute. We also want to make sure that we don't just rely on eligibility supports alone. Even if you get them, and again, 25% of people, so 75% of people may not ever get eligibility supports through DD. But even if you do, that alone is not going to build your good life. And this is to really show you don't put all your eggs in one basket, because if you're basing your good life only on eligibility supports and maybe all of a sudden you're not eligible for them anymore, then what's going to happen to your good life? How are you going to be supported to get to your good life? And so you don't want to just rely on that one thing. The same thing with relying on family. I think sometimes I hate the word burden, but sometimes the burden gets put on the families because, the family's doing everything. They're doing great. But what happens when something happens in that family? Somebody gets sick, somebody dies. So you have to make sure that you're not just relying on one kind of support. Don't put all your eggs in just one basket. Spread them out in those different baskets. And so if something happens in one of them, you've still got the other ones to pick up the slack, which is represented by this star here. So you want that star in the middle. You want lots of different kinds of supports so that not just one thing is helping you get to your good life. So some examples. Of course, we have the star tool. If you haven't seen this before, go check it out on our website. It's really easy to use. And again, it's really just to help you think through these types of supports. It's not something you have to fill out, but I think sometimes it's really good to go ahead and write the things in each section, because it can help you identify where the gaps are as well, right? So if you're not really using technology or not looking at technology, that might be something that's revealed when you fill this star out, and then you can start working on that area. It helps you identify maybe some of the goals that you want to work on. Is like, I want to build my personal assets and strengths to be able to do more things. I want to build my technology. I want to have more relationships. How am I going to do that? I'm going to get out in the community, right? So it all works together. Different ways you can use the STAR principle or tools. Just really exploring, figuring out, what you might be able to use. Like I just talked about, kind of mapping and identifying where the gaps might be. It's great for problem solving. Put anything in the middle of that star, and I guarantee you can go around that star and find some kind of ideas or resources around that star. Maybe things you don't have yet, but things you could possibly work on using as resources. It's great for planning. It's great for thinking about long-term or short-term. You can look at the star, for looking down the road into the future. You can look at how you're using it to get through your day-to-day life. This one's just an example of how you can plan a ride to work, right? You might be able to use your neighbors or coworkers, maybe somebody from your church, somebody from your family that could drop you off on their way to their job, right? So any kind of ideas like that. Personal assets and strengths would be, maybe I can follow a bus route. I can learn how to ride the bus. Technology, using Google Maps, using your smartphone, Wayfinder. There are all kinds of Wayfinders and things on your smartphones. In the community, is there a share a ride? Can you use a ride sharing program like Uber or Lyft? And then think that you're eligible for, through either supports through the division or through whatever, other kind of things that you might be eligible for. So that's how you can plan a ride to work. We call this the Shelley example because she doesn't really like to cook that much. Could she learn to cook? Apparently she could learn a little bit because she learned how to make banana bread during the pandemic, but not a lot of cooking there. But she knows someone who can cook for her, and that would be her husband. That's a relationship. She's really good at using technology to call and order something, or to order something online and go pick it up. Going out to eat in a local restaurant, that's in the community. And then, people might have eligibility supports to help pay for the food, or different government programs that can help with getting food that they can then learn to cook. This is similar to the trajectory that we talked about last time. During the pandemic, we really started thinking about, what would happen if we weren't around, and what kind of supports would people need to know about that Ben has available. And so we made a list of like people that know Ben well, that if somebody had to come in and be a substitute caregiver for us, they could call his brothers or one of his staff, that his past staff that was really close to him, or close family members or friends. People that could help them problem solve, like Shelly or Julie or Jenny that I work with. Um, I looked at all kinds of things in the personal assets and strengths, like our life insurance policies and annuities. And we have a notebook that we keep with lots of information for somebody in there. People need to know about that if they're going to help take care of Ben. Our house is paid off, things like that, assets that we have. How Ben uses technology, we listed all of those things. And then things that he does in the community that we would want to make sure continues, even if we weren't able to support him. This is how we use the STAR for hiring staff. Again, similarly, we use the trajectory to really help us think about good staff. This is a way that we really think about what are the assets, or what are the supports or type of things that a person has that would make them ideal staff. So if they know a lot of people, or they have good community connections, that's good for Ben, because they can connect him to more people. We want them to be outgoing and adventurous and a self-starter in their personal assets and strengths. We want them to be good at technology so they can help Ben get better at technology. We want them to be familiar with the community so they can get him out and about in lots of different ways. This is just another one. I'm not going to go through it, but it's an idea for respite that we use during COVID. But it's really a good way for people to think about short breaks, even if they don't have paid staff to do that. Different ways they can get a break. This is just a way to look at the STAR in like a day-to-day or week-to-week type of thing. And so looking at this, when Ben first got out of school, this was really his life, right? He had green paid services there for like 40 hours a week, and then he had mom and dad the rest of the time. But over time, and through lots of trial and error, we've been able to put more color in his life. And so he uses community supports. He uses other family and friends beyond just us. He's building his personal assets and his community, his things in the community. So you can see how much it's changed over the course of time and making that life more colorful. We also have a split STAR that you can use to plan for the future. So you can think about, what are the assets that I have now around the STAR, and what are things that I want to have for the future, that I'll need for the future for my good life. We also have what we call starter stars, or I like to call them cheat sheets. These are all available on our website. And so somebody put the Lifecourse Tools website in the chat. So check that out. Go to the STAR has its own section. It has a whole section. So if you scroll down through the library, you'll see the STAR section, and all of the different starter stars are there. And so these are just examples. One's healthy living, one's employment supports, one's respite options, and then this is for supported decision making. I'm going to skip the things to keep in mind. You guys will have access to all of this. I would say, just if you haven't used the STAR, try using it in your own life or in your professional role if you're a professional. Don't worry about doing it wrong. Just try it. It'll just help you think more broadly. You can think about different ways the STAR can be used, and please go explore the website and look at that STAR section. So I've got about 2 minutes left. Don't forget about our Good Life groups with Missouri Family to Family as well. They're free and available to anybody. We have them for all these different age groups. And this is Missouri Family to Family's contact information. And if you have questions, we have 2 minutes.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing anything in the chat box. I did drop the link to the webinar page at the division, where you can go back and listen to other recorded webinars that are there. I've also dropped the link to the Lifecourse tools, and as Jane said, go and explore. If you will go to that website, lifecoursetools.com, and hover, you'll see a library link, and all of those tools that Jane just talked about will pop up for you, that you can go and click and explore even further. Lots of examples on there, lots of good information. Jane, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to have you advance to slide 1.
Okay. There you go.
All right. And we're doing that. So the next one.
Okay.
Yeah. Mark your calendars. The next Mo DDD and U webinar is scheduled for June 28th, 12:30 to 1. And again, if something else comes through, I do see, here's a question. What resources can be linked for when they become elderly? That might be a good webinar topic.
It would. And I think, you know, I think you just have to keep exploring all those different resources as we go through those different life stages. But, you know, the STAR can be used at any age. And so, you know, really thinking about, are there other systems of support out there, you know, such as the AAAs and that kind of thing. And, you know, how you can keep those relationships going, you know, in later in life as well. And that could often be like a goal to work on. It's like, well, you know, my friends are dying or my parents are gone now, you know, but how am I keeping relationships in my life? Um, you know, looking at things in the community that are more elderly friendly. And then of course technology, I think as we age is going to be key for, I speak for all of us as we age, right? And because I'm getting there, you know, that I think you can just keep going around that star and trying to find ideas and then taking it for like specific, you know, if I'm moving, you know, for instance, if a person who's aging needs to move out of the current place that they're living, you know, using that star to really think about, you know, how can they find a new place to live and what are the different things they can use around the star to make sure that they have a good place to live, right? So I think
Right.
just taking those individual problems and plugging them into that as people are aging can be helpful.
Right. And I'll just throw in real quickly that when my mom had a major life change later in life after she had retired, moved to a new town, we actually used the STAR concept in helping her plan around what community things that she could do and how she was going to fill her days. So, and my mom does not have a disability. So that was just a testament to that the tools can be used for anybody in the planning process. So, all
They're
right.
people
Well,
tools.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. All right, well, we are out of time today. Kept you a minute over. Appreciate everybody being on. We hope to see you next month. Thank
Bye,
you all.
everybody.